She was unaware she was the richest woman in their town the morning her husband looked her in the eye and called her an upgrade he was no longer willing to wait on. She was standing in her own kitchen on Sycamore Street, 8 weeks postpartum, still in the maternity clothes she hadn't gotten around to donating, their newborn son, Eli, pressed against her shoulder, when Marcus Webb set down his coffee, straightened his collar, and told her, in the measured tone of a man who had rehearsed this, that he had met someone more aligned with where he was going. His mother Denise was at the kitchen table. She did not look up from her cup. And somewhere across town, in a lakefront property called Cedar Cove, a woman named Jade Fontaine was waking up in a bed she had no idea she was sleeping in on borrowed time. What Marcus did not know, what he had never once thought to look up in 7 years of marriage, was that the ground beneath his gym, the land his entire business identity stood on, was titled to his wife. That the vacation rental where his girlfriend had been posting sponsored content for 6 weeks belonged, by deed, to the woman he had just compared unfavorably to an upgrade. That Nadia Okafor Webb was, by every measure of property record in Grover Falls, Tennessee, the single largest private landowner in their town. The coffee was still warm. Eli made no sound, and Nadia said quietly, "Okay, Marcus." He heard surrender. He had never been more wrong about anything in his life. This isn't just a story about a husband who chose the wrong woman to underestimate. It's about what happens when 40 years of a mother's quiet work finally speaks louder than one man's noise. If you believe that real strength doesn't announce itself, tap like and subscribe, because this story was made for you. Drop a comment and tell us where in the world you're listening from tonight. To understand what Nadia held, and what it cost her to hold it quietly, we have to go back to where everything she owned actually began. But first, the kitchen on Sycamore Street needs finishing. Marcus had straightened his collar before he walked in. Nadia noticed that. She noticed it the way she noticed most things about him now, from a slight remove, the way you watch weather through glass. He was dressed for the gym, which meant he was dressed for being seen, which meant this conversation had been planned before he ever sat down. He pulled a chair out from the kitchen table and turned it around, straddling it backwards in the way he did when he wanted to appear relaxed and in control simultaneously. Denise sat at the far end of the table, both hands wrapped around a mug of coffee she had made from Nadia's kitchen, in Nadia's kitchen, without asking. She did not look up when Marcus began to speak. He said her name once. Just Nadia. Not with warmth and not with cruelty, with the measured neutrality of someone delivering a decision that has already been finalized in other rooms. He said he had been doing a lot of thinking. He said he had been unhappy for a while, and he believed she knew that, and he thought it was better for everyone, Eli included, to be honest, now, rather than let this go on. He said the word transition twice. He said the phrase go our separate ways, as though it belonged to both of them equally, as though it had been a mutual drift and not a directed departure. Then he said Jade's name. He did not say she was the reason. He didn't need to. He said that Jade represented something he had been missing. Drive, he said, direction. Someone who understood what he was building and wanted to be part of it. He said, and this was the sentence that hung in the kitchen air long after he was gone, that he needed someone more aligned with where he was going. Someone, he said, glancing once, briefly, almost clinically, at the soft weight of Nadia still carrying her postpartum body in a stretched gray top, who takes care of herself. Denise's coffee cup made a small sound against the table. Nadia looked at him. She did not look away, and she did not look down. She held Eli closer, and her hand spread flat and steady across his back, and she said, "Okay, Marcus." He blinked. Something that might have been uncertainty moved across his face, but it passed quickly because it had nowhere to land. He reached into the folder he'd brought and slid a set of documents across the counter. A pre-drafted settlement offer, 8 pages, paper-clipped, already bearing the letterhead of a firm called Hargrove and Sills. He said there was no rush, but that sooner was cleaner for everyone. He and Denise exchanged a glance then. A small, satisfied glance, the kind shared between two people who have successfully completed the difficult part of a plan. He was wrong about what had just happened. He was wrong in a way that would take him 72 hours to fully understand. What Marcus Webb did not know, sitting in that kitchen in his pressed polo shirt, certain that the woman across from him had nothing, was that Nadia Okafor Webb was the largest single private landowner in Grover Falls, Tennessee. Not by income, not by liquid assets, by land, by deed, by the quiet, compounding weight of 40 years of one woman's patience, transferred to her daughter through a holding company called Okafor Property Holdings, LLC, a name that appeared on county tax records and title documents, and nowhere else that Marcus had ever thought to look. 19 properties, 7 residential rentals, 4 undeveloped lakefront parcels, 3 commercial ground leases, and 1 lakefront vacation property called Cedar Cove, listed on Shoreway Vacation Rentals at $389 per night, where a woman named Jade Fontaine had been sleeping for 6 weeks, posting sponsored content to 400,000 followers from a dock that Nadia's mother had built with proceeds from a classroom salary, on land that had belonged to Nadia since before Marcus ever said her name at an altar. The total portfolio, last appraised 14 months ago, was valued at $6.4 million. He left 20 minutes later. The front door closed. His car reversed from the driveway with the particular confidence of a man who believes he has just done the hardest thing cleanly. The kitchen settled into silence. Nadia stood at the counter for a long moment, Eli asleep now against her shoulder, her hand still moving in slow circles on his back without her thinking about it. She did not look at the settlement offer. She did not cry. Something was happening inside her that she did not yet have a name for. Not anger, not grief. Something quieter and stranger than either. Something that felt almost like the ground becoming solid under her feet after years of it being soft. She opened the kitchen drawer nearest the window. She wasn't sure why. Her hand moved to the back of it, past the pens and the takeout menus, and found the photograph she kept there. Vera in autumn light, standing at the fence line on Route 11, wearing her brown work coat, looking directly at the camera with the expression of a woman who has just finished something and found it good. Nadia set the photograph on the counter beside the settlement offer from Hargrove and Sills. She looked at her mother's face for a long time without speaking. Outside, the morning continued as though nothing had changed. It did not yet know what had. The scene in the kitchen on Sycamore Street is not where this story begins. It begins in 1983, in a small office on the second floor of the Grover Falls Savings and Trust building, where a 29-year-old schoolteacher named Vera Okafor sat across from a loan officer named Gerald Pruitt and placed $14,000 in cash on his desk. She had saved it over 12 years of classroom salaries, 12 years of bringing lunch from home, and wearing the same 4 pairs of shoes in rotation, and telling herself that patience was not the same thing as waiting. The money was rubber-banded into neat stacks. Gerald Pruitt looked at those stacks for a long moment before he looked at her. Then he processed the paperwork for a vacant lot on the eastern edge of Grover Falls without another word. Vera signed her name in the clean, deliberate cursive she also used to grade her students' papers, folded her copy of the deed, and placed it in the brown leather briefcase she carried everywhere. She drove home. She made dinner. She did not tell anyone what she had done. That was how Vera built things. Quietly, and then permanently. Nadia grew up in the back seat of her mother's car, trailing Vera from one property to the next on Saturday mornings, sitting on front steps while Vera walked fence lines, watching her mother crouch at foundation corners and test window frames with the flat of her palm. Learning without knowing she was learning that land was something you could touch, and something you could keep, and something that did not leave you the way other things left you. Vera never explained these trips as lessons. She simply brought Nadia along, the way you bring someone along when you trust them with the ordinary texture of your life. The brown briefcase always came too, latched and worn at the corners, holding whatever paperwork needed to be signed or reviewed or filed. By the time Nadia was 12, she could identify a property boundary marker on site. By the time she was 20, she had forgotten she knew this, the way you forget things that were never framed as knowledge. Vera was diagnosed with a slow-moving cerebrovascular condition in the winter of the year. Nadia turned 30. The doctors used careful language. Vera did not. She called Camille Durant the following Monday morning. Camille had been Vera's attorney for 16 years by then, a lean and precise woman who had drafted every Okafor Holdings transfer document with the same unhurried care she applied to everything. Over the next 8 months, working alongside Vera's accountant and a tax specialist from Nashville, Camille restructured the full portfolio under Okafor Property Holdings, LLC, with Nadia listed as sole owner and beneficiary. 19 properties. All of them pre-existing, all of them cleanly titled, all of them walled off from any future marital claim by the specific legal fact of their transfer date. The paperwork was completed on a Thursday afternoon in October, 3 months before Nadia's wedding. Nadia signed the transfer documents at Camille's office on a Tuesday, distracted and grateful and not reading closely, because she trusted her mother's attorney, and because she had a cake tasting that afternoon and a venue walkthrough the following morning, and because it did not occur to her that these papers were the most important thing she would ever put her name to. She initialed each page where Camille indicated. She shook Camille's hand. She left. She did not open the briefcase Vera pressed into her hands at the doorway. She put it in the closet of her childhood bedroom and went to meet her fiancé for dinner. 2 weeks later, on a cold October morning that smelled of wood smoke and turned leaves, Vera asked Nadia to drive her out to the Route 11 parcel. It was one of the undeveloped lots, just land, just fence line, just a view of the Lake District in the distance going amber and rust. Vera walked the boundary the way she always had, unhurried, her hand trailing the top rail of the wooden fence, her brown coat buttoned to the collar. Nadia walked beside her, hands in her pockets, half listening, thinking about centerpieces. Vera stopped at the corner post and looked out at the water. "Don't let anyone rent your worth to you month by month," she said. Nadia nodded. She thought her mother was talking about the property. She was not. 2 weeks after that, Vera had the stroke. She survived it, but she was different afterward. Quieter, slower, her language arriving in shorter passages. She lived for 14 more months. She never walked a fence line again. The brown briefcase stayed in Nadia's closet. Patient, waiting to become relevant. Marcus Webb came into Nadia's life the way certain people do, with enough warmth and forward motion to feel like a rival. He was building the gym then, still in the planning stages, full of the specific energy of a man who has decided that this time the story ends differently than his father's did. He told Nadia, on their 3rd date, that her quietness was one of the things he loved most about her, that she never needed to perform, that she made rooms feel steadier just by being in them. She believed him. She had no reason not to. He meant it. That is the part that matters, and the part that makes what came later harder to name cleanly. The irony, and it is sharp enough to cut, is that among the documents Nadia signed on that Tuesday afternoon in Camille's office was the transfer for Parcel 14, a commercial lot on Caldwell Street, then vacant, assessed at $62,000, sitting undisturbed in the Okafor Holdings portfolio without a building on it. 2 years into the marriage, Marcus broke ground on web fitness and performance. He negotiated a long-term ground lease through a numbered property management LLC, dealt entirely through a middleman, paid his quarterly installments on time, and never once thought to look up who owned the earth beneath the foundation he was pouring. He raised a glass to Nadia at their rehearsal dinner that October. He said she was the best decision he had ever made. She smiled. She believed him. The briefcase was still in the closet. The marriage that began with that toast would be the next thing to be built, slowly and with genuine intention, and the next thing, just as slowly, to come apart. The dismantling of a marriage rarely announces itself. It doesn't arrive with a single act of cruelty that can be pointed to and named. It arrives the way water damage does, quietly behind walls, invisible until the morning you press your hand against something that should be solid and feel it give. The second year was when Nadia first noticed the shift in Marcus's language. Not the words themselves at first, the direction of them. Where he had once asked her opinion and waited for it, he now asked it and answered it himself before she finished speaking. At a dinner with 2 of his gym investors, a couple named Derek and Simone Hatch, Marcus interrupted Nadia mid-sentence to correct something she'd said about the neighborhood's development timeline. The correction was minor. What stayed with her was not the interruption, but the way he did not notice he had done it. The way he simply continued, his voice filling the space where hers had been, as though the exchange had gone exactly as intended. She told herself it was stress. The gym's first full operating year was demanding. She told herself that people under pressure contract inward, and that it would pass. It did not pass. By the 3rd year, the corrections had become a pattern with its own grammar. Marcus edited her in public the way a person edits a document they're responsible for. Not maliciously, but with the casual authority of someone who has decided they know better. He began introducing her at events as his wife, rather than by name, as though the role were sufficient. He described what she did as keeping things running at home, which was accurate but incomplete in the specific way that reductions always are, technically true and quietly devastating. Then Denise began coming more often. She never announced visits. She arrived on Tuesday mornings with food she preferred and opinions she delivered as observations, moving through the Sycamore Street house with the proprietary ease of someone who had mentally already redecorated it. The throw pillows Nadia had chosen were replaced with ones Denise found on sale and installed with a comment about how the colors now felt more grown up. The family photographs on the hallway shelf were rearranged, not removed, just repositioned in an order that placed Marcus's childhood photos at the front. Nadia noticed. She said nothing. She told herself this was what mothers did when they loved their sons. At a Sunday dinner in the 4th year, pot roast, Denise at the head of the table as though the house were hers, Marcus mentioned that he was expanding the gym's training staff, bringing on 2 new coaches. Nadia said something about the neighborhood and its growing young professional population, something about timing and market, the kind of observation that came naturally from years of watching her mother read land and community the way other women read weather. Denise set down her fork with a small, considered smile and said, "It's lovely that you take an interest, dear. Marcus's background in business makes him well suited to these decisions." She picked her fork back up. The table continued. Later that night, Nadia heard Marcus on the phone in the next room. He was laughing. She had not heard him laugh in the Sycamore Street house in some time. The gym accounts came up in the 5th year, when Nadia offered to help with the quarterly property reconciliations. She had the instinct for it, had grown up watching Vera navigate exactly this kind of paperwork, and she said so carefully, without claiming expertise she didn't hold. Marcus looked at her with an expression that was not unkind, and not quite kind either. "That's not how partnerships work," he said. "I'll handle the business side. You handle things here." She accepted this. She told herself it was his project, his dream, the thing he had built from the particular fear of his father's lost house, and that it would be unkind to push. She did not push. She absorbed. She was very good at absorbing. The name Jade first appeared in the 8th month of the 5th year, mentioned once, in passing, in the context of a new marketing contract for the gym's social media presence. Nadia did not register it as significant. 2 weeks later, Marcus came home at 11:15 on a Tuesday, saying the contract review had run long. His phone was face down on the kitchen counter before he had set down his keys. She noticed. She told herself she was looking for reasons that were not there. She asked once, in March of that year, gently and without accusation, whether everything was all right between them. He looked at her with enough irritation that the question became, somehow, her fault. "I'm building something," he said. "I need you to be supportive, not suspicious." She apologized. She was not sure what she was apologizing for. She apologized anyway. Then she discovered she was pregnant. Marcus's response was a pause before the smile. The pause lasted 3 seconds. Nadia counted them without meaning to. He said the right things after that, in the right order, but they arrived slightly behind their cues, like an actor who has learned the lines but not the timing. He talked about the expansion year. He talked about how they would need to think carefully about finances. He did not touch her that night. It was in the 7th month of the pregnancy, propped against the headboard at 10 in the evening with her lower back aching and her ankles swollen, that Nadia opened Instagram and saw the post. A woman she did not follow, but whose content had drifted into her feed. High contrast, kinetic, the particular bright energy of someone who had decided their life was content. The woman stood on a dock over still water, morning light behind her, arms wide, face tilted up. The caption said, "Building something real." The location tag read, Cedar Cove, Lake District, TN. Nadia looked at the dock. She looked at the water behind it. She looked at the pale wooden boards of the dock itself, the specific weathered grain of them, the way the morning light caught the edge of the railing. Something moved through her, not a thought exactly. A recognition without language, like a word you know but cannot immediately place. She set the phone face down on the nightstand. She pressed her hand flat against the side of her stomach where Eli was moving, slow and steady, and she breathed, and she told herself she did not know what she thought she knew. She was right that she did not know. She did not know the half of it. The dock she was looking at had been built by her mother's hands and her mother's money, on land that had belonged to Nadia since before Marcus ever proposed. And the woman standing on it had been Marcus's guest there for 4 months. What Nadia felt was not certainty. It was the first crack in the wall she had been leaning against for 5 years. She would not name it tonight. But it had opened, and it would not close. What began as private dismissal was about to become something with sharper edges. Something structural. Something that would take things from her she could not get back by simply enduring quietly. It started with a note on the kitchen counter. 2 weeks before her due date, Nadia opened the drawer where they kept household paperwork and found an envelope with her name on it in Marcus's handwriting. Inside was a single folded page and a debit card she did not recognize. The page said, in 3 short paragraphs, that Marcus had made adjustments to their banking arrangements to better reflect their transitioning household situation. The joint account had been restructured. The new card had a current balance of $340. He had written the words transition budget in quotation marks, as though the phrase were borrowed from somewhere official, as though this were a procedure rather than a decision. He was not home when she found it. He did not call to explain it. She stood at the counter for a long time, the card in one hand, the note in the other, her full-term body aching at the hips, her feet swollen in the canvas slides she'd been wearing for 3 weeks because nothing else fit comfortably. $340. She set the note down. She put the card in her pocket. She did not call him. She told herself there was an explanation. She was very good still at telling herself that. Eli arrived on a Wednesday morning in the 3rd week of November at Grover Falls Regional Medical Center after 14 hours of labor that Nadia moved through with the focused endurance of a woman who had learned early that pain was something you breathed around rather than against. The nurse who stayed closest through the final hours was a woman named Angela Morris, who had a steady voice and warm hands, and who called Nadia by her first name every time she checked on her, which Nadia noticed and held on to like something solid. Marcus was present. He held her hand during the final hour. He cried briefly when Eli was placed on her chest, and the crying was real. That much Nadia believed then and believes now. There was something genuine in him in that moment. Then Eli was swaddled and handed back, and Marcus took out his phone. He photographed Eli from 4 angles. He photographed Nadia once, from the side, and she saw him look at the image and then set the phone face down without posting it. She understood what the look meant. She filed it away in the place she kept things she was not yet ready to think about directly. He was texting before they moved her to the recovery room. She did not ask who he was texting. Denise arrived at the Sycamore Street house the day Nadia came home, as though she had been waiting at a starting line. She had brought food, her own recipes, nothing Nadia would have chosen, and she had brought opinions about the nursery arrangement, the feeding schedule, the positioning of the bassinet relative to the window. She moved through the house with a quiet efficiency that looked like help and functioned like occupation. Within 48 hours, she had reorganized the kitchen cabinets, relocated Vera's photograph from the counter to a shelf in the hallway, and established a rhythm of arrival and departure that centered around Marcus's schedule rather than Nadia's. 3 days after they came home, Nadia overheard Denise speaking to the neighbor across the fence, a woman named Patricia Owens, who had left a casserole on the porch. Denise's voice carried the particular warmth of a woman performing concern for an audience. "She's struggling to cope," Denise said, with a small sigh that functioned as a period. "We're all just trying to support her through it." Patricia murmured something sympathetic. Nadia stood at the kitchen window, Eli against her shoulder, and felt something harden in her chest. Not loudly, quietly, and then permanently. The conversation about attorneys came in the 6th week. Marcus sat across from her at the kitchen table one evening, the same table where Denise now presided at Sunday meals, where nothing was arranged the way Nadia had arranged it, and told her, in the reasonable tone he used for business decisions, that he had been speaking with a family attorney about their situation. He said it was to protect both of them. He said the word protect twice. He said that given the recent changes, he did not specify what changes, it would be sensible for her to consider whether her current state of mind made her the most stable option for Eli's primary care. He said current state of mind the way Denise had said struggling to cope, with the careful precision of someone placing a word on a scale to see how much it weighs. He had already hired the attorney. Nadia did not know this yet. The audience does. The firm was Hargrove & Sills on Cumberland Avenue, retained 3 weeks before Eli's birth. The partner assigned to Marcus's case was a man named David Recht, who specialized in asset protection and custody structuring. Marcus had met with him twice already. The settlement offer sitting in that folder on Recht's desk had been drafted before Eli drew his first breath. What no one in that house was aware of Not Marcus, not Denise, not even Nadia, who was moving through those weeks on 4 hours of broken sleep and $340 and the specific quiet grief of a woman whose home no longer felt like hers, was that 3 days ago, an automated email had arrived in Nadia's inbox from Shoreway Vacation Rentals. The subject line read, "Cedar Cove Annual Maintenance Renewal. Action Required." It was buried 14 messages deep beneath pediatric appointment confirmations and a formula coupon and a weather alert. Nadia had not opened it. Jade Fontaine was still at Cedar Cove. The ground lease renewal clock stood at 28 days. The irony does not announce itself. It simply waits. At 3 in the morning on a Thursday, the house finally quiet. Denise's rental car in the driveway. Marcus asleep down the hall. Nadia sat in the nursing chair in Eli's room with the debit card in her hand. The room was dark except for the small amber glow of the nightlight, shaped like a crescent moon that she had chosen herself, before everything changed. Eli slept in the bassinet, his breath even and unhurried, entirely unbothered by what surrounded him. She turned the card over in her fingers once. $340. She could not remember the last time she had felt like herself. Not postpartum Nadia, not Marcus's wife, not Denise's project, just herself. The woman who had grown up in the back seat of her mother's car learning that land was something you could hold. The brown leather briefcase was in the closet in the spare room. She had not opened it in 4 years. She was not ready yet. But something in her was beginning to arrive. Now the audience knows everything. Every layer has been laid down. The origin, the erosion, the stripping away of access and dignity and basic financial footing. And so when this Tuesday morning arrives again, it arrives differently than it did in Chapter 1. It arrives with full weight. Denise had come the night before. She had arrived at 7 in the evening with a container of food nobody asked for and a manner that suggested she was rescuing something. She moved through the Sycamore Street kitchen with her customary efficiency, adjusting, reorganizing, relocating Vera's photograph from the counter back to the hallway shelf where she had decided it belonged. Nadia watched her do it. She did not say anything. She was 8 weeks postpartum and running on interrupted sleep and $340, and she had learned, by now, that objecting to Denise's rearrangements required more energy than she currently had to spend. Marcus came home at 9. He and Denise spoke quietly in the hallway for several minutes. Nadia heard her own name once. She heard the word situation. She did not go into the hallway. She nursed Eli at 11 and again at 2, and was standing at the kitchen counter at 6:15 in the morning, her full-hipped, soft-bodied frame moving slowly through the particular exhaustion of new motherhood when she heard Marcus's voice in the living room. Low. Warm in a way it had not been warm with her in some time. She could not hear the words, but she could hear the register. Easy, unhurried, the laugh in it. She stood still. She recognized what she was hearing. She had been recognizing it for months and explaining it away for just as long. He ended the call when he heard her move. The shift in his footsteps was immediate. Then Denise came into the kitchen from the guest room, already dressed, already composed, coffee already in hand. She sat at the table with the deliberate ease of someone who had been positioned there in advance. She did not look at Nadia. She looked at her coffee. Marcus entered a minute later. He had straightened his collar. He pulled a chair out and straddled it backwards, and looked at Nadia with the expression of a man who has practiced this. He said her name. He said he had been doing a lot of thinking. He said what he needed to say in the measured, bloodless language of a decided man, the transition, the alignment, the direction he was going. And then, because he was Marcus Webb, and he had spent 7 years editing Nadia downward by degrees so small that neither of them noticed the accumulation, he said the part that he had perhaps not planned to say, the part that came from somewhere less rehearsed. He said Jade was motivated, put together, someone who understood what he was building. He said, and this is where his eyes moved, just briefly, over Nadia's rounded stomach, her soft arms in the stretched gray top, the maternity clothes she had not yet had reason to exchange for anything else, that he needed someone who actually took care of herself. The room did not go silent. It went something worse than silent. It went ordinary. Denise took a sip of her coffee. A car passed outside. Eli made a small sound against Nadia's shoulder, and then settled. Nadia did not move. She did not let her face do anything with what she had just heard. She had learned this skill across 5 years of Sunday dinners, and intercepted opinions and conversations that ended before she finished her sentences. The skill of receiving a wound without showing the entry point. Marcus reached into the folder he had carried in and placed the settlement documents on the counter. 8 pages, paper-clipped, Hargrove and Sills letterhead. Minimal spousal support. A custody structure built around his schedule. No enumeration of business assets because, as far as anyone in that room believed, there were none. He said there was no rush, but that sooner was cleaner. He said the word fair twice. Denise nodded at this point. Once, small, final, the nod of a woman closing a ledger. Nadia looked at the documents. She looked at Marcus. She looked at him with the full, steady attention of a woman who has just understood something she cannot yet name, but will not forget. Okay, Marcus, she said. He heard surrender. The word sat in the room, and he took it as confirmation of everything he had decided she was. Absorbing, passive, someone who would take whatever shape the space around her required. His shoulders dropped slightly. The performance relaxed. He glanced at his mother and she looked back at him, and something passed between them that they believed was relief. His phone buzzed as he picked up the folder. He pulled it from his pocket and glanced at the screen. It was a message from his gym manager, a man named Troy Simmons, forwarding a scanned document with the subject line, Caldwell Street, lease renewal, urgent. Marcus read the first 4 words, pocketed the phone, and picked up his keys. He had bigger things to focus on. Troy would handle it. He did not say goodbye. Denise gathered her coat from the back of the chair and followed him out, pausing at the kitchen doorway to look at Nadia with an expression that was trying to be kind and landing somewhere in the territory of satisfied. Then she was gone too. The front door closed. The car engine turned over. The sound of it receded down Sycamore Street until there was nothing. Nadia stood at the counter, Eli against her shoulder. The settlement offer beside Vera's photograph, the photograph she had retrieved from the hallway shelf at some point in the last 10 minutes, without consciously deciding to. It was back on the counter where it belonged. Her hand rested flat on the counter beside it, steady. She had absorbed everything she was going to absorb. She stood at the counter for a long time after the sound of Marcus's car disappeared. Eli had fallen asleep against her shoulder, his weight warm and even, his breath the slow, reliable rhythm that was the only steady thing in the house that morning. Nadia did not move for several minutes. She looked at the settlement offer. She looked at Vera's photograph. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked twice and went quiet. The kitchen was exactly as it had been an hour ago. Same light through the same window, same faint smell of the coffee Denise had made from Nadia's beans without asking. And yet nothing in it felt the same. She set Eli down in the bassinet in the living room. She came back to the kitchen. She picked up the settlement offer from Hargrove and Sills and read it from the first page to the last. Slowly, the way she used to read student essays, not for the argument being made, but for what was missing from it, What was missing from it was everything. $800 a month in transitional support. A custody schedule that placed Eli with Marcus on alternating weekends and every Wednesday, structured around gym hours that Marcus himself had set. No enumeration of shared assets beyond the Sycamore Street house, which Marcus proposed to sell and divide. No mention of any business holdings. No mention of any property portfolio. Because as far as David Recht at Hargrove and Sills understood the situation, there was nothing else to mention. She set it down. Her hands were steady. She noted that they were steady. She picked up her phone and opened her email. She had 43 unread messages. She scrolled without purpose at first. Then something snagged her eye. The Shoreway Vacation Rentals subject line, sitting there unopened from 3 days ago. She pressed it. The email was routine. Annual maintenance renewal for Cedar Cove, Parcel 7, Okafor Holdings LLC, signature required by the 30th. There was a link to the property management portal. She pressed that too, and the Cedar Cove listing opened. The photographs she had never looked at closely, the amenities list, the guest calendar, the reviews. Then she opened Instagram without meaning to. She typed Cedar Cove into the search. Jade Fontaine's account was the third result. The posts loaded in a grid. 12 of them, all from the same location, all in the last 6 weeks. The dock, the water, the morning light catching the weathered railing in exactly the way Nadia had seen it on a phone screen 7 months ago when she was pregnant and not yet ready to name what she recognized. Jade's posture in every image, arms wide, chin up, entirely at ease in a place she had every reason to believe was hers to occupy. The most recent caption said, "Fresh starts." It had 4,011 likes. It had been posted 4 days ago, the day before Marcus told Nadia he was leaving. Nadia looked at the dock her mother had built. On land her mother had bought. On a parcel transferred to Nadia 3 months before she married the man who had just left this kitchen believing he was taking everything. Something arrived. Fully and finally, and without drama. She understood now what Vera had meant on the Route 11 fence line that cold October morning. Not about tenants, not about property, about this, about the specific cost of letting someone determine your value month by month. Installment by installment, small concession by small concession, until you have given away so much of yourself that you are standing in your own kitchen with $340 and a settlement offer that assumes you have nothing. Vera had seen it coming. Vera had built the architecture to prevent it. And Nadia had nodded at the fence line and not yet understood, and then spent 7 years proving her mother right about the danger. She was done proving it. She called Camille Durant at 2:17 in the afternoon. The phone rang once. "Camille," she said, "it's Nadia. I need a full inventory of everything I own, all of it, and I need to know what I'm owed." A pause, not of surprise, but of a woman reorganizing her calendar in real time. "I'll clear my morning," Camille said. 8 o'clock. The call lasted 40 seconds. Nadia put the phone down. She picked up Vera's photograph and carried it to the living room, where she set it on the side table next to the bassinet. She looked at her mother's face. She looked at Eli's face. Then she went to the spare room closet and took out the brown leather briefcase, worn at the corners, latched, patient, and put it by the front door so she would not forget it in the morning. Durant and Associates occupied the 3rd floor of a sandstone building on Millhaven Street, and at 8 o'clock the following morning, Nadia sat across from Camille with the briefcase open between them, Eli in his carrier against her chest, a legal pad on the table bearing the heading Okafor Holdings LLC, Complete Asset Inventory. Camille worked through the list without ceremony, parcel numbers, assessed values, lease terms, renewal dates. Her voice was level and unhurried, each property named and confirmed before the next was read. 7 residential rentals, 4 undeveloped lakefront parcels. Cedar Cove, Parcel 7, the Route 11 lot, 8 others across the Lake District, then the commercial ground leases. Camille read the first 2 without incident. Then she reached Parcel 14. She read the assessed value, the lease commencement date, the current tenant of record. She said the name aloud. Webb Fitness and Performance, LLC. Caldwell Street, Grover Falls. The office went quiet. Camille did not look up from the page immediately. When she did, her expression had not changed. She was waiting. Nadia sat perfectly still. The carrier pressed Eli warm against her chest. She heard the words again in the space behind them, turning them over with the deliberate care of someone making sure they have understood correctly. Then she said, quietly, "Read that again." Camille read it again. Nadia exhaled once, slow, complete, and said nothing for a long moment. There was no satisfaction in her face. There was something that looked more like the expression of a woman who has found a load-bearing wall she did not know existed, and is now understanding the full shape of the house she has been living in. Camille placed her pen flat on the legal pad and looked at her client. "How do you want to proceed?" Nadia straightened in her chair. She looked at Camille with eyes that were clear and direct, and entirely without trembling. "Correctly," she said. "And thoroughly." Camille picked up her pen. 3 legal tracks were now in motion. They would converge in 72 hours. The conference room at Durant & Associates occupied the northeast corner of the 3rd floor, and on a Friday afternoon in late November, the light came through its tall windows at a low angle that fell across the long table in a way that made everything on it clearly, unavoidably visible. Camille had chosen this room deliberately. She chose everything deliberately. Nadia arrived first. She had been there 20 minutes when the elevator opened. She was seated on the far side of the table, Eli's carrier on the chair beside her, a glass of water untouched at her right hand. She wore a dark blue dress she had not worn since before the pregnancy. It fit differently now, softer across the hips and chest, and she had not tried to make it fit otherwise. The brown leather briefcase was on the floor beside Camille's chair. The Okafor Holdings portfolio binder, burgundy cover, 3 inches thick, tabbed and indexed, sat closed in the center of the table. Marcus came in at 2:03 with his attorney, a trim man named David Recht, who wore his confidence in the set of his jaw and the deliberate pace of his walk. Marcus was dressed for an audience. Pressed gray jacket, good shoes, the particular grooming of a man who had decided that appearance was argument. He glanced at Nadia when he entered. His expression registered mild surprise that she was already seated, and then settled into something practiced and neutral. He pulled out the chair directly across from her and sat with the ease of a man who expects this to be brief. Denise had insisted on attending. She sat 1 chair to Marcus's right, handbag on the table, back straight, radiating the composed authority of a woman who has decided that her presence is both necessary and appropriate. David Recht opened his portfolio and uncapped his pen. He said they were ready to proceed. Camille opened the Okafor Holdings binder without preamble. She did not begin with the largest number. She began with Cedar Cove. She placed the deed on the table, a single document, county recorded, dated clearly, and stated its contents in the even, unhurried voice she used for all factual information. Cedar Cove, Parcel 7, Okafor Property Holdings, LLC, transferred in full to Nadia Okafor, sole owner, 11 months before the marriage, premarital asset, separately titled, not subject to division. David Recht's pen stopped moving. He looked at the document. He looked at it the way a man looks at something when he is deciding whether it is what it appears to be, and then understanding that it is. Marcus had not yet changed expression. He was still waiting for the part that would make sense of this, the part where the document turned out to be irrelevant. It did not turn out to be irrelevant. Camille turned the page. She presented the full Okafor Holdings portfolio inventory, 19 parcels, each listed by number, address, assessed value, and classification. She read them in order. The 7 residential rentals, the 4 undeveloped lakefront parcels, the commercial lots, the Route 11 property, the others. She did not rush. When she reached the bottom of the list, she read the total appraised value aloud. $6.4 million. She read it once and did not repeat it, because she did not need to. Then she said, with the same level precision she had used for every other fact in the last 4 minutes, Nadia Okafor Webb is the largest single private landowner in Grover Falls, Tennessee, by deed. The room changed. It did not make a sound. Marcus's face did not collapse or contort. What happened was subtler and more complete. Something went out of it. The performance dimmed. For just a moment, beneath the gray jacket and the good shoes, the audience saw the man who had grown up watching his father lose a rented house. The man who had spent 38 years building the distance between himself and that memory. Discovering in a conference room on a Friday afternoon that the woman he had looked at and seen smallness had been standing on ground he could not have imagined. David Recht cleared his throat. He said they would need a moment to review. Camille placed her hand flat on the next document before he finished the sentence. She said they would proceed. The third document was the Caldwell Street ground lease. She placed it on the table. She identified the parcel. She named the tenant of record, Webb Fitness and Performance, LLC. She named the landlord of record, Okafor Property Holdings, sole owner, Nadia Okafor Webb. She noted the lease commencement date, 4 years and 7 months prior. She noted the renewal deadline, 23 days from today. Clipped to the top of the document was the certified letter Marcus's gym manager, Troy Simmons, had forwarded to Marcus's phone on Tuesday morning. The letter Marcus had pocketed without reading because he had bigger things to focus on. Marcus looked at the document. Then he looked at Nadia. Something moved through his face that wasn't anger. It was the specific expression of a man understanding, for the first time, the true dimensions of what he had been standing in. He opened his mouth. He closed it. David Recht placed a hand on his arm. Camille placed the fourth document on the table. Printed pages from Jade Fontaine's Instagram account. 12 posts, each geotagged at Cedar Cove, each time-stamped across the last 6 weeks, several bearing sponsored content disclosures with documented commercial revenue. A letter from Durant and Associates to Jade's 3 active brand partners, Fit Life Nutrition, Loom Athletic, and Briar Coast Apparel, had been sent that morning, noting the unauthorized commercial use of premarital private property. Jade had posted a retraction at 11:47 a.m. She had not contacted Marcus. The retraction did not tag him. Denise had stopped looking at the table. She was looking at the window. David Recht pulled the original settlement offer from his own portfolio, the 8-page document from Hargrove and Sills, minimal support, the custody structure built around gym hours, no enumeration of assets. He placed it on the table, and then Camille placed the portfolio valuation beside it, and for a moment both documents simply existed in the same field of view, and the distance between them required no commentary from anyone in the room. David Recht pushed his chair back. Not dramatically. Quietly, and with the controlled composure of a professional who has just understood that the case he prepared does not resemble the case he is now in. The conference room held its silence. Nadia looked at Marcus. She had been looking at him with the same steady, unhurried attention since he walked through the door, and she looked at him now the way she had looked at the settlement offer on the Sycamore Street counter, reading not what was there, but what was missing, understanding the full shape of the document. What was missing from Marcus Webb in this moment was everything he had built his identity on top of. The gym, the image, the narrative of ascent. He had been standing on land that belonged to the woman he had asked to take $800 a month and sign away her claim. She spoke once, quietly, without raising her voice or leaning forward or marking the moment in any way, except with the words themselves. "You've been paying me rent for 4 years," she said. "You just called it a marriage." The room did not react. It absorbed. Marcus looked at her for a long moment with an expression that had finally stopped performing anything at all. In it, briefly, was something that might have been the beginning of genuine understanding. Not remorse yet, but recognition. The recognition of a man who has seen, too late, what he destroyed. David Recht spoke quietly to Marcus. Marcus nodded once, slowly, without taking his eyes off the middle distance. Camille turned to Denise. She said, in the same professional register she had used throughout, that the presence of non-party observers was no longer appropriate to the proceedings. She said it once. Denise stood. She gathered her handbag. She did not look at Nadia as she moved toward the door. At the threshold she paused for half a second, the pause of a woman recalibrating something she had been certain of for years. And then she was gone. Marcus attempted to speak once more. His attorney placed his hand on his arm again, and this time Marcus stopped. There was nothing he could say that would not simply add to the record of what had already been documented. Nadia closed the portfolio binder. She lifted Eli's carrier from the chair beside her, settled it in the crook of her arm, and stood. She looked at Camille and said simply, "Thank you." Then she picked up her water glass, took a single calm sip, and set it back down. She walked out of the conference room with her son in her arms, and the brown leather briefcase's work fully done behind her, and the room she left was still full of people who had nothing left to say. What happens in a conference room on a Friday afternoon takes the rest of the weekend to fully land. And then, in the weeks that follow, it lands on everyone. Troy Simmons, Marcus's gym manager, received the formal ground lease renewal terms from Durant and Associates on the following Monday morning. Market rate for commercial property on Caldwell Street, as established by the most recent Grover Falls County assessment, $4,200 per month, a 31% increase over the existing lease, non-negotiable. The renewal window, 23 days. Troy forwarded the documents to Marcus at 9:14 a.m. with a message that said simply, "You need to call me." Marcus called David Recht instead. Recht reviewed the lease, reviewed the parcel title, reviewed the transfer history, and called Marcus back in 40 minutes with the information Marcus already knew, but needed a professional to confirm. The land was Nadia's, had always been Nadia's, and there was no mechanism by which it could become anything else. The building Marcus owned was worth considerably less without the ground beneath it. He could not relocate. The equipment alone would cost $300,000 to move and reinstall, and there was no comparable Caldwell Street footprint available in the current market. He could not buy the land. Nadia was not selling. He had 22 days remaining. His attorney told him to sign. He signed on day 19. The Caldwell Street expansion. Marcus had announced to his 3 principal investors in October a second training floor and a recovery spa he had projected would increase annual revenue by 40%, was quietly removed from the prospectus the following week. No announcement, no explanation. The investors noticed. 2 of them requested a meeting. Jade Fontaine's partnership with Fit Life Nutrition was suspended pending review on the same Monday the lease letter went out. Briar Coast Apparel followed by Wednesday. Loom Athletics contract manager sent a brief email saying they were pausing all active campaigns while they assessed brand alignment. Jade's follower count, which had climbed to 412,000 on the strength of the Cedar Cove content, began moving in the other direction. Her retraction post, carefully worded, professionally drafted, entirely devoid of Marcus's name, sat at the top of her grid for 11 days before she archived it. She did not return his calls. She did not need to explain why. The math was self-evident. Denise called Nadia twice in the 10 days following the conference room. Nadia watched the calls arrive and did not answer. She felt no particular satisfaction in this. She simply had nothing to say that would be useful to either of them. And she had learned, finally, to stop paying for conversations that cost her more than they returned. On the third call, she answered. Denise's voice was different, smaller, careful in a way it had never been careful before. She said she hoped Nadia was well. She said she hoped Eli was well. She said she had been doing a lot of thinking. Nadia said, "I hope you're well too, Denise." She said it and meant it, because she had no interest in anyone's suffering, only in her own freedom. Then she said she needed to go, and she ended the call, and she set the phone face down on the Sycamore Street counter where the settlement offer from Hargrove and Sills had once sat, and she did not pick it up again for an hour. Marcus came to the door on a Thursday evening in December, 3 weeks after the conference room. He had lost some of the deliberateness in his posture. The practiced ease was gone, and what remained underneath it was a man who looked, for the first time in Nadia's memory, genuinely tired. He stood on the porch without his folder and his strategy. He asked quietly if there was anything that could be done. Nadia stood in the doorway with Eli against her shoulder. The same doorway, the same shoulder, the same sun, and looked at her husband with neither coldness nor warmth, but with the steady clarity of a woman who has already made every necessary decision. She told him that Camille handled everything now. She told him to contact David Recht. And then she closed the door. Not with force, not with satisfaction, but with the simple finality of a woman who has stopped leaving things open that should have been closed a long time ago. The scene softened from there. The divorce was finalized in February. Nadia retained full sole ownership of the Okafor Holdings portfolio, all 19 parcels, every deed exactly as Vera had arranged them. She retained the Sycamore Street house. Cedar Cove was relisted with Shoreway Vacation Rentals under direct management by Nadia Okafor, her birth name, her legal name, the name on every contract Vera had ever signed, at $450 per night. It booked out 6 weeks within the first month. The doc photograph Marcus had posted with the caption "Fresh Starts" remained on his Instagram. The property it depicted belonged to Nadia. It had always belonged to Nadia. Nothing about that required announcement or correction. On a morning in early March, when the Lake District had just begun to soften from winter into something tentative and pale, Nadia loaded Eli into his car seat and placed Vera's photograph on the passenger seat and drove out to Cedar Cove alone. She parked on the gravel, carried Eli to the dock, and stood at the end of it the way her mother had stood at fence lines, with ownership and attention, unhurried, looking at the thing that was hers. The water moved in the slow, indifferent way that water moves. The dock boards were weathered in the particular way of things that have been standing a long time and intend to keep standing. She had been here before, in photographs, in memory, in the 7 months of a pregnancy, when she had seen this dock on a stranger's Instagram and felt a recognition without language. She understood it now. She understood that Vera had not been talking about property. Not only about property, She had been talking about the specific cost of letting someone else set the terms of your worth and paying their invoice without question, month after month, year after year, until you have spent down everything your mother quietly built for you and cannot remember what the original balance was. Vera had seen it coming. Vera had prepared the architecture. And the architecture had held through 7 years of quiet erosion and 3 weeks of crisis. Because good architecture does not require the occupant to announce it. It simply stands. The richest woman in Grover Falls was never hiding. She was simply the only one in the room who already knew what everything was worth, and patient enough to let the documents speak when the time came. Nadia stood on the dock with her son in her arms, and her mother's photograph in her pocket, and the water moving below, and she thought about what it meant to hold something. Really hold it, without needing anyone else to see it in your hands. She thought about classrooms and fence lines and worn leather briefcases and 40 years of careful, quiet work that asked for nothing and outlasted everything that tried to consume it. If this story moved something in you, if you have ever been underestimated by someone who should have known better, tell us in the comments. We read everyone. And tell us where in the world you're listening from tonight, because this story belongs to all of you. She looked at Eli's face for a long moment. Then she looked at the water. Then she whispered something to her son, something small and certain and entirely between them. And for the first time in a very long time, she wasn't waiting for anything at all. She was already there.